Hello, good evening. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Tonight's session is our first session of a 7-part series, Chrysalis Wellbeing series, which we will provide specialized education, information and resources to enhance the mental wellbeing of primary care health professionals, your patients and consumers. So the series will cover vulnerable population groups, provider self-care and accessing primary mental health services, which is tonight's topic. My name is Charles Broadfoot and I am one of the Professional Development Officers with the PHN. And I'd firstly like to acknowledge the First Peoples and traditional custodians of the lands in which we're all meeting tonight and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any of our Aboriginal friends and colleagues joining us on the live stream tonight as well. So tonight's session is being recorded and the recording and the slides will become available on our website from tomorrow. So just head to thephn.com.au and click on the Education tab. Tonight we will be using Slido for questions and the session evaluation. So you can access the Q&A tab and the polls tab on the right-hand side of your screen if you're using a computer or laptop. Alternatively, you can head to slido.com and enter the event code CWS1. So that stands for Chrysalis Wellbeing Session and then the number 1. A third option is by scanning a QR code that will pop up on your screen throughout tonight as well. So please type your questions throughout the presentations tonight. We have allocated time after the main presentations for a Q&A discussion panel. So it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. So firstly, we have Poonam Daru. Poonam is the Practice Knowledge Coordinator with On the Line Australia. She has a master's degree in counselling psychology and has been working at On the Line for the past 3 years. Secondly, we have Jenny Campbell. She's the Director of Morgan Campbell Consultants. Jenny has served in senior management and executive roles across the health sector for more than 15 years. Jenny has been the National Project Manager with the Australian Department of Health for 3 years, leading the National Initial Assessment and Referral for Mental Health Care Initiative. Jenny holds qualifications in social work and human service management. And our third speaker is Sandra Fitzgerald. Sandra is the Health Pathways Clinical Editor with the PHN and also a practicing pharmacist. So thanks again everyone for joining us, and I'll now hand over to Poonam.
Great. Thanks, Charles, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Poonam Daru, and like Charles mentioned, I am the Practice Knowledge Coordinator at On the Line. I'm closely linked to the learning and development of all our counsellors. I'd like to take this moment to welcome each and every one of you tonight and appreciate you taking the time out from your busy schedules. My presentation would go for about 10 to 15 minutes, and tonight I would be talking to you about Mind Health Helpline and how this is available for all of your clients who come to you if they're in need of any low-intensity counselling services. Next slide. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We offer our respect to the elders of these traditional lands and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, past and present. Next. I'd like to start off by discussing very briefly about On the Line. Now, we are a professional social health organisation providing counselling support anywhere, anytime. Now, most of our services are available 24 hours a week, 7 days a week. Our flagship services include the Suicide Callback Service, Suicide Line Victoria and Men's Line Australia. Now, the Mind Health Helpline has been commissioned to On the Line by the Hunter, New England and Central Coast PHN. And the next few slides will talk a little bit about how you can access this helpline, what does this mean for your clients. We'll spend a little time talking about referrals, and along the way, if you have any questions, do feel free to put them in the Slido on your right-hand side of the screen. Next. Now, we are a free phone and online chat counselling service for people who work in the Hunter, New England and Central Coast region. Our professionally trained counsellors offer free counselling services across a variety of topics. These are just a few that I've put down here, whether it comes to anger, behavior change. Last year, we saw an increase in isolation and loneliness due to COVID. Our counselors also work with clients across their relationship and family problems, those who are troubled by suicidal thoughts, those who are bereaved by suicide. We also focus on their overall well-being. We have a lot of clients who come to us who are aware of their issue, but are not really sure how to navigate the various challenges that they face. And our professionally trained counselors are available there to support them and help them work through their daily stresses. Next. When a client calls Mind Health Helpline, what can they expect? One is that we have professionally trained counselors who can talk about their stresses and concerns. Our service is available Monday to Saturday, and the clients can call us anytime between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. The counselor and the client will work in a collaborative relationship and develop strategies to manage their day-to-day stresses, look into their situation and identify, the best way forward. Your clients also have access to 3 into 30 multiple sessions with the same counselor. Now, this feature is also a free service for your clients. So they have 3 options. One is they can register via a website and access web chat counseling. 2, they can call us anytime Monday to Saturday, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., have a one-off single therapy session, support them in the here and now. And the third way of us supporting them by Mind Health is 3 into 30-minute counseling session. Now, if need be, your clients might also be referred to other supports in the community if they do not meet the low intensity criteria. We'll talk a little bit about eligibility and who Mind Health Helpline is for. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, Mind Health is essentially for people who are at risk or have experienced symptoms of distress or mild mental symptoms of mental illness for less than 6 months. It's also for those clients who are probably exiting or stepping down the step care model from moderate to severe complex needs. And as shared earlier, it's for those individuals who are working and living in the Hunter, New England and Central Coast region. If you have a look at the image that's on your screen, the step care model, we work with populations who are at the at-risk group and those who come under the mild mental illness category. Having said that, if we do get clients who are operating at a moderate or severe to mental illness level, it's not that we're going to turn them away. We will still support them. We will provide them that care in the here and now. However, we might refer them on to more appropriate services, which is beyond the scope of what we provide. Just to share again, we are low intensity. It is a free service, and it's for those who work in the Hunter, New England and Central Coast regions. Next slide, please. Now, the counseling services that are available to your clients who you refer to Mind Health broadly come under 3 main service functions. One is the intake and assessment and support. Second is counseling and support. And the third one is postvention. Now, intake and assessment takes place once you give us the referral from your client. We then call the client and we do a risk assessment. Counseling and support, like we discussed earlier, is available 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday to Saturday. And the client can have 3 into 30-minute free counseling sessions. This is also Monday to Friday. Postvention support takes place when the client has completed the 3 into 30-minute sessions. We give them a follow-up call 6 weeks after their last session. During this follow-up call, we check in with them, we touch base, we see what changes have come about, we do a bit of an assessment, and we also check if they need re-entry into the service. And if need be, we could look at offering them 1 or 2 more sessions. It's important that you share with your clients that this is a free service. A lot of them hesitate. A lot of them are concerned about the logistics. And, there's nothing better than having it over the phone and the comforts of their own home. All right. Just to talk a bit about referrals and how you come into that and your role into the referrals. Next slide, please. To refer a client, it's really simple. You can refer a client by completing and emailing us a client referral form. Now, this referral form is available on our website. The contact details will be provided at the end of this presentation, and this will also be uploaded on the website, so you will have this information available to you after tonight's webinar. If we can click on the client referral form, please. If you can zoom in a bit. Thank you. So this form, as discussed, is available on our website. It's for those clients who are aged 15 years and above. If you go through the form, it's fairly simple. We have the date of referral. Under referral details, this is your section, who is giving us the referral. We'd appreciate it if you can give us your email address, because we'd like to communicate with you and let you know whether we've accepted the referral. If we've had to step up the client, then we'd like to communicate that as well, so you're aware of next steps for your client. If you look at the client details section, it's your basic demographic information: name of the client, postcode, phone number, client consent for referral. This is something that's really important. We encourage that you grab this before you send us the referral. If this box is not ticked, then we will not be able to proceed, and our team will get back to you and let you know that you need to get consent before we can continue. On the second page of the referral form, we have reason for referral. Where's the client struggling? What does the client need help with? We have client presentation. How was the client presenting when they came to see you? And the last section on the form is if you have done a K10 score, or if there are any other measurements that you have taken, we'd appreciate it if you can put that in. And if you scroll down at the bottom, you see a little save box. So all you need to do is save this form on your desktop, and then you can email it to us at mindhelp@ontheline.org.au. Can we go back to the presentation? Thank you. It's important that you complete all the fields, and then you save it and then send it to us. And like I've been saying, it is a free service. We want your referrals. A lot of clients struggle sometimes when it comes to mental health and accessing supports. A lot of them find navigating the mental health system quite challenging. So it would be great if you pass on these, the numbers and the contact details to your client when they come and see you. Next slide. So what happens once we receive the referral? Once you email us the referral, we contact your client within 1 business day. Our intake and case coordinators conduct a thorough risk assessment. We do the K10 assessment if it's not already done. And we also check in with the client to see what is it that they were seeking help on. This prepares the counselor before the session. If need be, along the 3 multiple sessions, the counselor might identify that, okay, this client would probably benefit from additional support, and we will then make referrals to community support services. If in the call there is any kind of immediate risk or risk of suicide or distress, then what our counselors do is they will undertake a thorough risk assessment. We will look at providing them immediate support in the here and now, talk about a safety plan, maybe do a duty of care call if need be, and engage with intervention services if required. So just to sum up our service, Mind Health is a free service for those clients who work and live in the Hunter, New England Central Coast region. We're available Monday to Saturday, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. We offer single session counseling. The client can just pick up the phone and call in. We offer web chat counseling. We also offer 3 to 30-minute counseling sessions. The eligibility criteria is they must be 15 years and above, and as far as possible, low intensity. That is, experiencing mild mental health symptoms for less than 6 months. If you need any kind of support in me explaining this a little bit further, please feel free to put it on the question and answers box on the right side, and we can talk about it towards the end of the presentation. I'd just like to share a few contact numbers with you. Next. If you need any counseling support, you can direct your clients to ring us on 1300 029 131. Our website is mindhealth.org.au. Email address for any inquiries or referrals can be sent to mindhealth ontheline.org.au. Because of COVID, we've stopped postal deliveries of our promotional material. So if you'd like to order promotional materials, we have flyers, we have little wallet cards, we have posters. It's available on our website, that is ontheline.org.au/about-on-the-line/promotional materials. I'd like to thank you again for your time tonight, and I look forward to some questions toward the end of the session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Poonam. That was great. Really practical information, and I hope our attendees, our listeners, grab some more information about that. I think it's a really great service that we offer in our region. All right, so now I'd like to hand over to Jenny Campbell. We'll like Poonam said, just enter your questions into the Q&A tab at any stage throughout these presentations. We will have time at the end. So I'll now pass over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everybody. I'm joining you tonight from Wagga Wagga, which is the land of the Wiradjuri Nation, and pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging as well. Tonight, I'll be speaking to you about the National Initial Assessment and Referral Project, which is an initiative of the Australian Commonwealth Department of Health. And really, it's lovely to come after Poonam's presentation about low-intensity services, because this project has always been about how do we know enough about an individual that we can match their treatment needs, their recovery goals, to a service type and intensity that's most likely to meet those needs. So what is it important that we know about a person in order to work out if low intensity is an appropriate option, or if psychological interventions would be appropriate, or perhaps if specialist and acute services are required? So the Commonwealth Department have been working on now for 3 years, and I've got the privilege of being the National Project Manager for the initiative, a decision support tool to help primary care and other services within the sector to work out the most appropriate service type and intensity. So we've released national guidance, which I've provided links to in the slides for those who are interested in diving into that. And one of my jobs will also be to introduce you to the automated programming decision support tool as well. Next slide. So the Initial Assessment and Referral Project, I'll use the acronym IAR, I'll hope to avoid other acronyms throughout the evening, is focused on ensuring that individuals have their needs and experiences understood in the context of 8 initial assessment domains. And those 8 initial assessment domains largely track neatly back to the mental health treatment plan and existing assessment tools that are designed to explore multiple components of a person's experience in life. And I'll introduce you to those in a moment. Importantly, we now categorise the steps as levels of care, of which there are 5, including specialist and acute care at level 5 that I'll introduce you to as well. And then importantly, we wanted to provide that decision support tool that bridges the gap between what we know and understand about a person and their experience of mental illness or distress, and a support tool that matches that with a service type and intensity. Importantly, in a stepped care approach, and I think many of you have probably heard from the economists over the years about the importance of using our scarce resources wisely, but stepped care has a much more person-centred focus than that. And we know that underservicing an individual can absolutely increase their risk without the appropriate supports and strategies in place, can result in further deterioration of mental health, or no change at all, which can be as bad and prolong the person's experiences. But importantly, we know that over-servicing a person can represent an unreasonable burden of care for the person in comparison to the likely benefit from that care. And so what's occurring across the mental health sector, and certainly this is supported by literature, is that we do see people dropping out from care before there has been a therapeutic gain, or perhaps following just one initial assessment or one appointment. And so what we'd like to do is see better personalised care. And importantly, from the GP and primary care or referrer perspective as well, we know that an awful lot of time in our sector is spent making referrals that don't progress. And the consumer reports are that, or patient reports are that they feel an experience of bouncing around in the system amongst closed doors and wrong doors because the appropriateness of the referral wasn't perhaps considered in light of the program's eligibility criteria, for instance, but also that service's intensity and their level of response that they can provide. So it's our hope that the decision support tool, when used, will also increase the efficiency at the referrer end too, but it's also a tool that can be used by providers. So next slide. And we'll skip this one as well. I've covered it in advance. So you're aware, and this is important background, I mentioned that we've been on this journey now for about 3 years. First of all, we did undertake a literature review, an environmental scan, a state of play report, and more importantly, I suppose, we learned that we were absolutely operating in an evidence-informed space and not an evidence-based space. And so our expert advisory group has been a really key driving force for the development of these decision support tools. And on the next slide, if we could slip there now, you'll see our list of members for the expert advisory group. So it's currently chaired by a GP, Dr. Carolyn Johnson, who maintains many roles, including very busy generalist practice. And we've had representatives from all of the relevant mental health colleges, consumer and carer representation. And also we knew that there was some great innovation already happening in Australia. And so there've been some key peak bodies and other industry leaders involved in the development of this decision support tool as well. Because it's been led by the Australian Department of Health, there was an investment in the guidance, the development of a decision support tool, and now that tool is available freely right across the sector. It's a publicly available link, which I'll share with you tonight, and anyone is able to use the decision support tool. But there is further work that's ongoing to support implementation by general practice and others. And so part of my role is to provide training to clinicians who are interested in using the tool, and typically through the PHN, but also provide direct support. So to the next slide now, it's time, I suppose, to get into what is this decision support tool, but I do need to tell you what it isn't. So this is not a new assessment tool, despite its name, initial assessment and referral. The decision support tool is designed to sit along an existing initial assessment process. So that might be a mental health treatment plan or review in the context of primary care, but also it might sit alongside an intake assessment or a commission provider's first assessment with a person. So it's not a new assessment. It's not prognostic, diagnostic or predictive in that it is about understanding that person's experiences at that point in time, looking back where we need to, such as around suicide risk or attempts, previous experience of mental illness or hospitalisations. But for the most part, we're looking at that person's experiences over the last 4 weeks. It's not a treatment planning tool, but when the results of the decision support tool are flowed through to the care provider, it certainly can be a useful communication aid. And more importantly, and I think GPs and primary care are more comfortable with this concept than perhaps many other parts of our sector because of their experiences using health pathways and other decision support tools, but it's not a replacement for clinical judgment. This is an aid for your clinical judgment. It is an aid for, helping inform next steps on the referral journey for a person, but it is not a replacement at all for that clinical judgment. So the next slide. So this is probably a slide that you've typically seen. And this is, I suppose, when we were introduced to stepped care in Australia a few years ago, this is how we, conceptualised, envisaged stepped care and still features very heavily in the graphics that you're seeing, including in Poonam's presentation earlier. There are many things about this slide that don't really tell us what stepped care is all about. We're categorising people based on illness, but we know, especially in primary care, that we are working with people who experience distress, generalised distress or significant distress in the context of environmental stresses. We also know that it's not necessarily easy to delineate between what is mild, what is moderate, what is severe mental illness. Is that only based on their symptoms or their distress, or is that based on, their functioning or coexisting conditions that they might have, or their risk levels. So the fact that a mental illness in itself might be considered severe certainly isn't helpful in us working out what level of care does that mean a person requires. So rather than categorise population groups based on prevalence and incidence of mental illness, what we've done is produced 5 levels of care. And those 5 levels of care categorise service type and intensity. So on to the next slide. So here are our levels of care, and I apologise that the font might be a little small here, but the service that Poonam was just introducing us to by On the Line typically sits at level 2, so low intensity interventions. So what are low intensity interventions? And importantly, in that middle column, or middle row, I should say, is a description of those people who are most likely to benefit from that service type and intensity. As you can see, there's a self-management option there as well. A low intensity at level 2. Level 3 is moderate intensity. So typically psychological interventions delivered reasonably frequently and in a structured way, such as PHN commissioned psychological interventions or those available through the MBS. Level 4 is about the highest level of intensity available in primary and community care settings. So typically involving a psychological intervention, psychosocial supports, clinical care coordination. And at level 5, we have acute and specialist supports. A few things to note about these levels of care that are perhaps different to how we've communicated about stepped care in the past. First, they're not based on how the service is delivered. So just because it's delivered face-to-face doesn't make it low intensity, just because it's delivered over the phone doesn't make it, face-to-face doesn't make it high intensity, over the phone doesn't make it low intensity. So it's agnostic to how it's delivered. Importantly, this is a transdiagnostic level of care system. So a person with schizophrenia, for instance, in a non-acute phase of their illness, with a discrete focus of care such as sleep health, sleep hygiene, may benefit from an evidence-based low-intensity intervention to focus on that particular discrete issue. Equally, a person with depression experiencing a suicidal risk may need the services we can provide at acute and specialist care. So it's certainly not contingent on the person's diagnosis or the perceived severity of that label, rather on a combination of several factors that we establish through the 8 domains. So on to the next slide now while I introduce you to the 8 domains. So within the initial assessment domains, there are 2 categories of domains. The first are our primary domains, so domains 1 through to 4. So these are symptom severity and distress. And in domain 2, we're looking at risk of harm. And yes, that of course includes risk of suicide, but we're also factoring in risk arising from severe self-neglect, risk arising from non-suicidal self-injurious behaviour, and risk of harm to others. In domain 3, functioning, we're exploring the impact of the mental illness, mental health issue or distress on that person's functioning. In terms of diminished performance, days out of role, and how to understand that. And in domain 4, we're looking at the impact of coexisting conditions. So typically, for a good proportion of people presenting in general practice, we know that there are usually coexisting conditions that we need to be thinking about and inquiring about. And here in particular, we're talking specifically about substance use or misuse, physical health conditions, and intellectual disability or cognitive impairment. So most clinicians would look at our primary domains and say, look, I can get a pretty good sense from where a person, what a person might require from our sector, from our system, just by looking and inquiring about these domains. And they're right. And these domains are rated, or I should say weighted, higher than our contextual domains. So our contextual domains are domains 5 through to 8. The contextual domains at domain 5 covers treatment and recovery history, domain 6, social and environmental stresses, domain 7, family and other supports, and domain 8, the engagement and motivation. So whilst the primary domains, domains 1 through to 4, are weighted higher than our contextual domains, our contextual domains have a really important circuit breaking role. And they do absolutely influence the intensity of care recommendations that the decision support tool will generate. So just an example of that, we might be working with a person who is experiencing very few or minor issues on all of our primary domains. So very few symptoms, low levels of distress, no risk of harm, minimal impact on functioning, perhaps some diminished performance at work, and no coexisting conditions to speak of. And so on their own, the primary domains might be thinking, okay, well, a self-management option at level 1 might be appropriate for this person. But when we get to domain 8, we discover that that person doesn't have high levels of engagement or doesn't have good motivation. And of course, self-management interventions are based on, or it's a precondition for self-management interventions, that the person is engaged and is motivated, because by their very nature, there's not a huge amount of support or assistance in a self-management option. So it would be very unwise of us to set a person who's not all that engaged and not all that motivated onto a self-management pathway. So immediately, someone who scores or rates as having low engagement, low motivation, level 1 self-management will be eliminated from the range of options recommended for the person. The other thing that it's important for me to tell you about the domains is, unlike the K10 and some other standard tools that you might be familiar with, we're not looking to set up a cumulative score or reach some arbitrary threshold that then either does or doesn't qualify someone for a particular level of care. So each domain has a rating scale, which I'll show you in a moment. And your ratings on each of those domains stand alone and they interact together in unique ways. So much so that there are 32,000 possible rating combinations that generate one of the 5 recommended levels of care as a result. And so the automation of this decision support tool as an online tool and a tool that can be integrated into practice software has been an incredibly important focus of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years. You might have experienced links to programs, for instance, that were based on a K10 score of X, or a particular score on the GAD, for instance, the general anxiety scales. It was really important to us that each of these domains were considered and thought through when the recommended level of care was made. That's how we get holistic and personalised care in this system. So the next slide. So what I'd like to do now is hold my breath and cross my fingers and hope that the link works. And this is a link that you can copy and paste, of course, into your own browser even while we're talking, but also use afterwards. As I mentioned, it's publicly available. You don't need a login, although Todd will need to accept the terms of use, which is the white box. Yeah, there we go. And only once we've accepted the terms of use does the tool become functional. The terms of use, the headline term of use there is that this tool is not a replacement for clinical judgment. So once you've accepted that, sorry, Todd, just click that box again. Todd is going to enter the drop-down box in each domain. Yep. And just randomly select any rating he likes. And only once all 8 domains have a rating selected will a recommended level of care be generated. You'll see at the top there, we've got a recommended level of care and that box is currently sitting empty. Once Todd's filled in ratings on all 8 domains, that will flash yellow briefly and the recommended level of care will appear. So this is a very random rating selection that Todd's doing, which is good. And you'll note there that Todd's very random selection of ratings has led to the system recommending moderate intensity services or above. So that would indicate, for instance, for this non-existent person that Todd's thinking about, Poonam's service with On the Line wouldn't be an appropriate service to consider for this person. The system is strongly suggesting you consider level 3, a psychological intervention, or above. When there's a plus that's accompanied by the recommended level of care, it's basically pointing to the minimum level of care that you should consider for a person, but is asking you to rule out any levels above that as well. Now, Todd, this is Todd's first time using this form, so I'm going to guide him as we work through this. But Todd, just under the recommended level of care, you'll see a green hyperlink that says read more about this recommended level of care. Yep, that's it. So once Todd clicks on that box, we'll see information about what level 3 services look like, what are the core clinical services, and what are the other support services that you might like to consider. Lots of PHNs have and are considering regionalising the levels of care, so that once a level of care is recommended, you can see in real time what services are available at the PHN level that matches that level of care. Importantly, and Todd's just scrolled down, which is fantastic, to show you a narrative description of when this level of care is appropriate. It was really important for us to include that narrative description so that you're equipped to overrule the recommended level of care if your clinical judgment doesn't agree, and so that you can then select your practitioner-determined level of care, because that is the most important thing that this tool does. It supports you as the practitioner to determine the level of care. This is just a recommendation. So you might land at level 3 and go, oh, that's funny. I really thought on the line would be okay for this person. So I'm just going to look, okay, I can see here that it's mild symptoms, right, okay. So we can look at that narrative description and understand a little bit about why this level of care has been recommended based on your rating combinations. So Todd, this is opened on a new tab. So you'll need to navigate back to the original tab. Yeah, so the one to the left, IAR DST. And what I'd like to do now is just show everyone the rating guides. So I mentioned, so if we can make sure we're back up at domain 1, Todd, by scrolling up. So I mentioned that each domain has a rating scale in which you make a selection as to the person's, the level of severity experienced by that person. So what I'd like you to do, Todd, is open up the rating guide for me. And again, this opens in a new tab. And you'll note here, at the top, we have an overview of this domain. So this is a reminder about what it is that we're paying attention to in this domain. So as I mentioned before, here in this domain, we're thinking about symptoms, we're thinking about distress, and we're also thinking about the behaviour of the symptoms and what's been happening for this person. So are things getting better or worse? Are symptoms improving or worsening? Within the rating guide, we also have a practice point as Todd scrolls down. And that practice point is any relevant best practice information. Sorry, just in the blue box up a little bit, Todd. Yep, keep going. There we go. So this practice point is about the role of standard assessment tools, for instance, but each domain has their own relevant practice point that may help you as you make a rating. So here we can see as Todd scrolls down, we have a rating scale where 0 means no problem in this domain. 1 means mild or subdiagnostic, 2 means moderate, 3 severe, and 4 very severe. And there are some descriptors there that are intended to guide you as you work out the rating that is most appropriate for this person. I'm going to take you through some of the rules for the rating soon, but that is the same pattern in terms of the rating scale that flows across all of our domains. So 0 always means no problem at all, and 4 always means this is the most severe the problem can be for this person. So Todd, just going back to our original tab now, the IAR DST. Yep. And we might just open another rating guide just to again. So if you could open risk of harm. Actually, let's open, impact of coexisting conditions. You'll have to navigate back. So we're really conscious that we've been implementing this now right across the nation. We have local hospital networks implementing, we have PHNs implementing in primary care and commission providers. Within the pandemic response in Victoria, head-to-help hubs were established, and those head-to-help hubs are all using this tool. The response has been quite phenomenal. But importantly, I'm conscious that when we are doing training, that busy practitioners, but especially general practitioners, will look at a rating guide like this and think, I am already so busy. This is incredibly dense and detailed on the screen, and this would take me a lot of time. So our implementation experience has been that once clinicians have completed training, but also once they're familiar in the use of the tool, it's typically a 1 to 2 minute tool to use. And it's especially helpful if you don't have time to use it with every person that you encounter in general practice with a mental health presentation. It is particularly useful when you're uncertain about the next steps. And so one of the reasons why it looks dense on the screen, but using the tool regularly increases the efficiency of your use of the tool, is because there is a structure or a pattern within the tool that we've built in. So Todd is showing us domain 4, which is the impact of coexisting conditions. Now, if I'm working with someone who has an intellectual disability and a co-occurring physical health issue and a co-occurring drug and alcohol issue, then I need to consider all of the descriptors at all rating points. But for instance, if I'm working with someone who doesn't have a physical health issue and doesn't have an intellectual disability, the particular rating point that I need to pay attention to is only rating point A. So as Todd scrolls down, we'll see that A always refers to substance use, B always refers to physical health, and C refers to intellectual disability and appears for the first time at 3C and 4C. And so there are structures right throughout the rating guides that, whilst dense to begin with, certainly help with ease of use over time and with familiarity. This is a program now, the decision support tool, that is being used by 100% of general practitioners in some PHN regions when they're making referrals to PHN commission services. For other PHNs, it's their intake teams or commission providers who are using the tool, or combinations of both. So scrolling back to our original tab again now. And what I'd like to do is just show you a couple of examples of the recommended level of care being generated in a really live way. So there are 32,000 rating combinations, but there are some circuit breakers that allow me to demonstrate how quickly changes in the ratings can be taken into account. So Todd, if you change the rating on either domain 1, 2, or 3 to 4, yeah. You'll note the level of care immediately changes to acute and specialist care. So there are combinations of domains, but a rating on its own that will absolutely govern the level of care depending on the seriousness of the rating. So with a rating of 4 on functioning, we're seeing functioning that's impaired to the extent that it's posing a risk to that person's health. And other factors that mean that this person requires a specialist and acute intervention. So again, really important if you're tossing up between supporting the person to access hospital, calling the ambulance, supporting that person to contact the state triage line, access line or mental health line, but unsure. There are some really key rating combinations or singular ratings that can help you make that decision. Currently, the decision support tool, so Todd, there's the copy result tab in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If Todd was to press on the arrow in particular, he'll drop down and be able to download an Excel spreadsheet that records or has captured the domains and your ratings. But as you saw, we didn't log in. You don't need a password for this site. There was no information that we recorded about the patient. And so therefore you can imagine that when this Excel spreadsheet is generated, there's no identifying information. You can upload it, however, to the patient file if that's helpful. But importantly, the Commonwealth has produced other digital decision support tools. So identical to this online tool, but using an automated programming interface and code library, etc., that does allow it to be integrated with general practice software. And so they're the sorts of things that PHNs are actively grappling with, especially if there is a good sense from general practitioners in the region that this is a tool that they would value and benefit from having access to in primary care. You've got access to it now, but we know that the more integrated we can make tools like this with general practice software, the better. So Todd, thank you for working through that online decision support tool now. A link to that's in the slides for us all, but what we'll do now is return to the slides. And for those who are interested in using, and we'll go to the next slide now, thanks. For those who are interested in using the decision support tool, these are some reasons why you might be thinking about it. So knowing the audience that we have today is predominantly practice staff, general practice, practice managers, nurses, etc. It is probably the referrer-led column that's the most relevant here. So one of the reasons why we're so enthusiastic about GPs and referrers using the decision support tool is our evaluation report and other research has absolutely supported our hypothesis that the earlier in a person's journey we use the decision support tool, the more likely we are to locate the right care at the right time for that person without them experiencing that bounce around in the system between closed doors. We also know that decision support tool is based on knowing an individual, having a conversation with a person, whether it be a patient that you've known in your practice for years or whether it's someone you're just meeting that day. That conversation is very important. And especially if you're doing a mental health treatment plan, the conversation's happening already. So in terms of the assessment burden on the person, if the referrer is using the DST or the decision support tool, it may save that person needing to go through an initial assessment or have the decision support tool used again unnecessarily if it's been used by the referrer. But in many PHNs, there's a mixed model emerging where intake teams or commission providers are also using the decision support tool. So that can be to confirm that the referral is appropriate, especially if referrers aren't necessarily using it commonly, to determine the intensity of response required from the service. So yes, the person's eligible, but how frequently do we need to see them? How intense does our response need to be? And then importantly, it can be a really helpful tool for providers to use when thinking about stepping the person onto another service because their needs are increasing or decreasing or changing. We know that mental health is not a static phenomenon. People need different levels of mental health care along the journey at different times. So there are many and varied reasons why the tool could be used. So on to the next slide now. We're going to skip this. This is, as Charles indicated, we've got, hopefully you're all thinking about questions in Slido and typing them in so we can stop and look at them at the end. But what I would like to do now, more detailed training is available, and certainly even self-paced training modules and tools are available for those who are interested in using the decision support tool. But I wanted to step you through, in case you're interested and tempted in going and practicing and using the tool, I wanted to step you through some of the things you need to know about the rating guides to help you with that process. On to the next slide. So on this first slide, we're reintroducing the concept that I already spoke about. We've got a rating scale, and that rating scale is consistent across all 8 domains. As we go up into the contextual domains, the factors that we're asking you to consider get much simpler than the primary domains. So much fewer words on the page. So on to the next slide now. And the next slide, we've introduced that rule. And as I mentioned, we're not aiming for you to come up with a composite score. The fact that we use numbers in the rating scale alongside severity is just shorthand for summarising severity. There is no need to keep or record those numbers or add them together. And the next slide. Importantly, if you're thinking about using the decision support tool, it's really critical that you note it is not the rating point of best fit that you select. So let's say that Jenny, A applies to Jenny, B applies to Jenny, and C applies to Jenny at rating point 1. But 2C also applies to Jenny. We only need one descriptor at the highest rating point for that rating to apply. So 2 is the rating that we would select for Jenny. And to the next slide. Your role is also to use all of the information available to you when completing the decision support tool. So it doesn't have to be used alongside a mental health treatment planning session or a mental health review. In fact, you may have a patient that you've worked with for many months, many years, that comes to you to talk about or seek help for a mental health concern. That person may have a treatment plan, may not need one, whatever your decision around that is, but you may have sufficient information from what they're telling you today that you just want to check in about how their experiences might have changed since you last saw them. And so what we know is that there might be information in your file records. For instance, there might be information that you're collecting on the spot through conversation that allows you to rate the decision support tool, and that is completely okay. It can occur beautifully alongside an existing assessment, but it's not dependent on a formal assessment in order to be able to use it. And on to the next slide. Throughout the guidance, and especially in Domain 6, where we're experiencing and exploring social and environmental stresses, we give lots of examples, and those examples are just there so that you can be guided to place the person in a rating that's most appropriate for them, but they're certainly not an exhaustive list. For instance, we never anticipated a global pandemic or horrific bushfires to rage across most of the southeastern states, and so there's some perfect examples that are absolutely not on the list, but they are just a guide to help you work out those ratings. And the next slide now, and we can skip that. So many of you are already using standard assessment tools, and they do have some utility in terms of determining the severity of symptoms, for instance, or the level of distress when using the K10. It might be that using the PHQ-9 is an appropriate tool for diagnostic purposes, for general understanding. They have really limited utility, though, in helping work out, well, where in this increasingly busy and noisy mental health sector is the person that I'm working with going to experience the most gain and the most appropriate service for them. And so we're not discouraging you from using the tools. In fact, we know that the standard assessment tools can help you establish severity and locate an appropriate rating for the person. But there is no score on a K10 or no score on a GAD-7 or PHQ-9 or whatever other tool that you're familiar with that links directly back to a rating on this particular tool. So yes, helpful to, improve certainty, but certainly, again, not dependent on you needing to use a standard assessment tool. And on to the next slide. We have completed, the University of Melbourne was commissioned by the Department of Health to complete an implementation review. So whilst most PHNs are actively implementing or planning for implementation, and certainly many other health services and systems beyond PHNs are as well, including a local hospital network over in South Australia and a major area health service in Victoria. But it was really important, especially given that the early literature review didn't give us much evidence at all around this particular part of stepped care. It was important that we did invest in research and build that evidence base ourselves. And so the University of Melbourne were commissioned by the Department of Health to understand the validity of the tool, especially face validity. What was the level of acceptance and response from the sector? What was its feasibility and implementability like? Like, we can produce great policy, but if it's impossible to implement because of a lack of resources, time, energy, etc., we need to know that clearly too. The implementation findings are many and varied. Overwhelmingly positive, though, in terms of the product itself, but importantly captured some really key implementation messages that we've certainly been communicating to and will continue to communicate to PHNs and other stakeholders about. These are some of the findings that related specifically to general practice and primary care services. So one message that we're really hoping to communicate to PHNs is the importance of considering the decision support tool in the context of the general practice workflow. So we want the decision support tool to, if it is implemented in primary care, if there's an appetite for that amongst the GP population in the region, to talk early with GPs in the region, to talk early with practice managers and practice nurses in the region about how the tool can be used, where it adds value, and importantly, how it integrates with things like practice software and health pathways and the mental health treatment plan. In some PHNs, for instance, we're seeing their online referral tools include the decision support tool right within the online referral form. We did see in the implementation reviews several general practices engaged directly in the review. Certainly GPs were, again, really positive, and even just last week I was in Tasmania working with a general practitioner around the tool. We have psychiatrists, including the Chief of Psychiatry, leading the implementation in some territories in Australia. But we know for sure that if we fail to understand the implementation realities, such as time and the commitment that it takes to complete the decision support tool, to be trained in the use of the decision support tool, and to do so in a way that makes sense in terms of if you already know exactly where a person needs to go in your local system, get them there. But if the decision support tool helps bring certainty to your next steps, that's really where the value is most of all. So being very careful to include you all in those conversations is one of our key messages from the department. And I guess finally, I think I've talked on the point below a little already, but 3 years in, we are now to this project, and the decision support tool that I've presented to you with today is now on the radar of the Productivity Commission and the government more broadly as we consider where and why and how it might be used and what are the other levers and enablers at the national level that will support its use in primary care. And so there is a bit of a watch this space message for me as I conclude this presentation. And we'll certainly keep communicating through the PHNs. I expect and hope that there will be further opportunities to talk with you directly, to provide training as needed. And one of the things that we'd be really keen on hearing back in the questions and answers is any questions that you have that I haven't addressed today that that might help you explore its relevance to your practice. But also hear some thoughts about what it is you need to help use the decision support tool in a real world environment. So thank you all, and I look forward to the Q&A panel at the end today where we can talk a little bit further about the project. Thanks, Charles.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. That was fantastic. A lot of great useful information. You can see a lot of work's gone into this. So yeah, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to present tonight. Just a reminder, you can post your questions in Slido throughout. We're getting some great questions coming in. Before that, we have one final presentation from my colleague, Sandra Fitzgerald, in our Health Pathways team. So I'll hand over to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you, Jenny, and everybody who's presented tonight. I am Sandra Fitzgerald, and I am one of the clinical editors for Health Pathways. I am a pharmacist by background, and I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction to what Health Pathways is all about. So next slide, thanks, Todd. So Health Pathways is based on a very successful model of collaboration developed in New Zealand by a group called the Canterbury Initiative, and has been around since about 2006 in New Zealand and in Hunter, New England since 2012, and the Central Coast since about 2013. Next slide, thanks, Todd. And at first sight, Health Pathways looks merely like just another online set of guidelines for treatment and management of clinical conditions and accompanying referral pages. And which is in fact what I'll be showing you today. But next slide, thanks, Todd. The main difference is that at its core, Health Pathways has provided our health system with a way of working together to best manage our collective patients and effectively implement system change. Next slide, thanks, Todd. When we're developing individual pathways or sets of pathways, the process we've adopted allows clinicians across the primary and acute sectors to develop relationships, openly discuss issues, strategise solutions that make the best use of specialised and scarce resources, and to innovate change to improve patient access to care. So Health Pathways then becomes the system enabler that allows the Hunter New England health system to evolve and rapidly adapt. And the online portal that you see on your desktop or laptop becomes the communication channel and repository of information for clinicians. Next slide, thanks, Todd. So on this slide, you'll see the login details for both the Hunter New England and the Central Coast Health Pathway sites. So the Health Pathway sites is where all the clinical information for clinicians is housed, and each of these Health Pathway programs has an accompanying patient information site that is not password protected, that you can pass on those login details to your patients, and on those sites you will find information that has been vetted by clinical editors to be clinically relevant and accurate, and it's also been assessed to make sure that it's an appropriate readability level so that most Australians will be able to access the information in there and understand it. It's the reading level is appropriate and not too high. Next, just click thanks, Todd. If you would like any stickers or cards that have all these details on them so that you can stick them onto your iPads, iPhones, any sort of mobile devices, tablets, or your laptop. Please just contact either Health Pathways or your PHN, and we'll be able to send that out to you so that you've got those details readily available. Next slide, thanks, Todd. So time only permits me to walk you through the Hunter New England site, but just so you know, both the Central Coast and the Hunter New England Health Pathway sites have got quite a broad suite of mental health clinical pathways, and I've indicated them all on the slide there. And I encourage you to log on and familiarise yourself with them. They're all set out the same way in terms of assessment management and referral, and so just have a look around if you're not familiar with health pathways and familiarise yourself with them. Next slide, thanks, Todd. And these are the mental health referral pages that both sites have, which we'll be looking at in a little bit of detail as well. Next slide, thanks, Todd. So you heard Jenny talk about this assessment and referral tool. We are starting the decision support tool, and we are starting to incorporate these into all of the health pathway clinical pathways as well as the referral section. And so you'll find links there to the decision support tool itself, as well as what the levels of care mean. And then for each of the 5 categories of support, that will link you through to the relevant referral page. Thanks, Todd. The next page. So one of the first pages that you'll find relevant that marries up with the talk you've heard tonight is the electronic mental health services or online treatment programs. And these are divided up by category. So we've had a look around and we've seen everything that's available that for clinicians to recommend to their patients, and then put them into the category that they are relevant for. Next, thanks, Todd. And so just looking, for example, at general mental health for adults, that's an example of what you'll find when you click on that drop-down box, and that's all the online electronic mental health services that we are aware of, that we've articulated for clinicians to recommend to their patients. If you think that there's something on there that's missing or that needs updating, please always send us some feedback, which is in the bottom right of the screen, that little chat kind of icon in the bottom right there. Next, thanks, Todd. And as you can see in the top left-hand corner, that is the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander icon. When you see that on any of the health pathway pages, that means that there's information that is specifically relevant for that population. Thanks, Todd. And that is the send feedback icon I was telling you about. And next. And so this is the patient mental health hotlines and telephone counselling page. And again, like the mental health online programs page, that's divided up by category. Next, thanks, Todd. And that's another icon that I want to draw your attention to, which is the multicultural icon. When you see that, you'll see that that's got information that's either been translated into another language or has been is particularly relevant for your multicultural patients. Next, thanks, Todd. And when you open up one of the drop-down boxes, so for example, here again, I've opened up the general mental health adults drop-down box, you can see that we have put down, we've articulated all the services that are relevant for general mental health for adults that have hotlines or telephone counselling available. Next, thanks, Todd. And this is our non-clinical community mental health support page. And this is more like our traditional referral pages in that it's divided up by geographic region. And this is where you will find all the organisations that support people with mental illness that need some support with their psychosocial functions. So, for example, around personal activities, household tasks, social activities, building independence, finances, and things like that. And when you look on the decision support tool, you see that this page is relevant for all 5 levels of intervention. Next slide, thanks, Todd. And this is currently where you'll find the Mind Health information, but we are also adding it to several other pages, and that was that process was underway today. Next slide, thanks, Todd. And so I mentioned earlier that both the Central Coast and the Hunter New England Health Pathways programs have got accompanying patient info sites. And I've just given you a little snippet there of what mental health pathways, mental health patient info sites are available across both of those. No password is required. You just need to give patients the URL, and they will be able to log on and find information that's clinically appropriate and with an appropriate readability level. And on there, we have also replicated the e-mental health and online counselling and telephone things that we have on Health Pathways. Next slide, thanks, Todd. And that's a screenshot of that information on the patient info site. So, Charles, that's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take any questions, but I encourage you to look around on Health Pathways and patient info. And I also encourage you to send any feedback if there is a service that you are aware of that we haven't articulated, or if something is not quite correct about one of the services that we have articulated, and we will update that. We check the feedback every working day, and we try and respond fairly immediately to that sort of feedback. Thanks, Charles.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sandra. That was great. All right, everyone. So we'll head into our panel discussion. So we have Poonam, Jenny, and Sandra ready for your questions. We've had a few come in so far. Thank you for sending those, but please type them in now if you have any burning questions. So we've got a few questions that came in for you, Poonam. So the first one is your referral form available as a download in RTF format or as a template for best practice so that can be used with our medical software?
Thanks, Charles. Unfortunately, at this time, our referral form is only available in an interactive PDF format. Having said that, all you need to do is just visit our website, you click on the link, the form opens up in a new tab. If you fill in all of the data and you download the form, all you need to do is attach it and send it to us via email. If at any point you are having trouble in saving, downloading, or attaching the form, you could send us an email at mindhealth@ontheline.org.au, and we can take it forward and perhaps give you a call and fill out the form with yourself on the line. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Poonam. Are people able to self-refer to Mind Health?
Absolutely. Clients don't need a referral form. Sometimes we do find that health providers want to refer their clients to us if they want to access the 3 to 30-minute sessions. Having said that, there is no prerequisite. Clients can simply pick up the phone and give us a call. If you download some of the promotional materials of the Mind Health website, all you need to do is just hand them the wallet cards or the pamphlets and a number, and all other details are available there. Thanks.
Great. We've got another question for you, Poonam. It's from Amita. What is the professional training that your counsellors are trained in?
Thanks for your question, Amita. So our counsellors need to have a minimum of a tertiary degree, that is a bachelor's, and a post-tertiary degree in a relevant discipline. Now, this would include psychology, counselling, social work, welfare studies, and even social science. We also make sure that they have a minimum of 456 hours of clinical contact counselling with, and this might even include placements if we deem that that is relevant. So these are the qualifications that we generally look for when we hire our counsellors. There's also a lot of in-house training that we deliver. We have a 2-week induction program, and we offer further training during this period as well, along with other professional development programs along the way. Thanks.
Great, thank you. We have had a question or two just about the IAR website that Jenny went through, so what the URL was. So the slides from this evening will be provided, and they'll go up on in our education library tomorrow. So all of the links in the slides that you would have seen, they're all hyperlinked. So we'll have those available to you from tomorrow. I've got a question now for you, Jenny, from Simone. One of the points in the Productivity Commission recommendations was to use something like this tool that would actually circumvent GPs, i.e. no need for I think you mean mental health plans there, Simone. Let me know if that's different. So, i.e. no need for mental health plans. Losing the connection with GP. Have you seen this gathering momentum?
Yeah, a really important question. So IAR absolutely is a feature of the Productivity Commission report, as I mentioned, and you're aware. And for other people who are joining the webinar, the Productivity Commission notes that recommends that the Australian government should fund the development and ongoing provision of a national digital mental health platform. And the platform should include a free person-centred assessment and referral to be used by GPs, and suggesting that individuals and others could use the platform in order to access mental health clinician-supported online assessment and referral. And so absolutely, there is some momentum around that strategy, but certainly I wouldn't suggest that we're, have a concrete way forward. The government does need to respond to the Productivity Commission's report. It's fair to say that it's not the view of the expert advisory group and certainly other stakeholders that I'm in constant contact with, such as PHNs and others, that the prominence of the GP should in any way be diminished, and that the role of the mental health treatment plan as a tool in primary care doesn't still have incredible potency. I think the question being asked, though, is around whether or not the mental health treatment plan has been hijacked as a code to unlock a door to care, and a communication tool to a community-based psychologist, as was recently said to me. And so I think it will be really interesting to look at how the policy rolls out moving forward if Action 10.4 from the Productivity Commission's report is endorsed, and the involvement of GPs, importantly, in what that looks like will be absolutely essential. From the centre of this project, as the months go by and as the years go by, certainly in our minds, the role of the GP has never been more important in supporting access to timely and appropriate care. So it's certainly my hope into the future that changes, but I don't have the keys to the kingdom, so I won't make those decisions or any announcements here tonight. But nothing that I'm hearing should indicate a diminished role for the GP, but perhaps an altered use of the mental health treatment plan. There to be any follow-up questions on that, of course, as well in the question and answer box too, because I think that is quite a complex discussion. I could probably talk a lot longer about it, but I hope that was enough for now.
Thanks, Jenny. That was good. Yeah, please type in further questions as you think of them. Another question for you, Jenny. Are you finding the use of the tool is easing the burden on the system by patients receiving the right care at the right time?
Yeah, so implementation is early and advanced. So we've seen really accelerated implementation, which is allowing us to look at some early findings. And part of my role is to support PHNs and commission providers and others to look at data that answers that question. Certainly the implementation review through focused groups indicated feedback from commission providers that they were seeing increased improvement in the appropriateness of referrals that they were receiving. And what we'd like to be able to understand into the future that would tell us whether or not IAR is fulfilling its intended purpose is, do people experience timely access to appropriate care? How often are they stepped up beyond that, for instance, because we didn't get that decision right earlier on? I'm very aware of some local health networks with hospital foundation funding who are asking those questions at the moment and doing data audits. And certainly the preliminary findings are very positive in terms of it, doing what it's intended to do. But I suppose time will tell, and we certainly have more evidence to gather. And there's a role at the general practice level, at the regional level, at the PHN level, at the state and the national level for looking at that and finding out those answers. And it's all very well and good for me as a part of the project team and the national project manager to say yes to that question. But I think the more independent research we have around that, the more confidence I can communicate with.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Another question for you, Jenny, from Simone. There are many clients that fit the moderate stepped care level that are turned away more on their past history from certain care places. Are you seeing the tool helping to stop this?
It should, if it's used with fidelity. So we absolutely agree. That has been the experience. Our expert advisory group has talked about that very feature a lot. So it may be that a previous hospitalisation, it may be the previous use of specialist care, it may be a current or previous diagnosis that for one reason or another in and of itself determines whether or not a person will be able to access a certain level of care. So we know that as we released this guidance and as we designed the levels of care and as we described this for the first time nationally and consistently, that it would mean that PHNs and others do need to look at their service models and ask that question. What are the parameters that we are setting up that indicate eligibility and appropriateness, and what changes do we need to make? There are certainly things like previous use of specialist services that we examine in treatment and recovery history on domain 5 that do maybe increase the intensity of the care required in the future, especially if there is a recency to that specialist and acute care. And we do look back somewhat in a person's experience when suggesting the level of intensity that might be required in the future. And that also goes for suicide attempts in the past, of course, as well as a predictor of future risk. So what we're asking people to do is consider that at a more granular level, at a more person-centred level, and use that to determine intensity of care that's required and the response that's needed, rather than see that being a further barrier to care, especially primary care. And I have to say, local hospital networks and others have embraced the tool, certainly without a legislative requirement to do so or a contracted requirement to do so. And I think that is certainly a hope shared by our state and territory partners, that primary care will become more proficient at supporting people and responding to their unique and person-centred and focused experiences, rather than just applying a one-size-fits-all decision to a diagnosis or a previous use of a part of our system. I think I interpreted your question correctly there. It's a really important one. IAR guidance on its own and the decision support tool doesn't change it. How we redesign the system and use the tool to influence other parts of our service and service design and planning will be really important. And PHNs are very aware of their role in that space.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. So it looks like that's all the questions that we've had for this evening. So we might finish the session there. So thank you very much to our speakers, Poonam Daru, Jenny Campbell and Sandra Fitzgerald. We really appreciate you giving your time up this evening to present. Thank you everyone for your attendance and also for entering your questions into Slido. We've had some great discussion. So I just want to let you know that, as I mentioned, this is session 1 in our Chrysalis series. Number 2 will be on Wednesday, the 31st of March, and the topic is managing yourself and your patients in times of disaster. And it will provide GPs, practice nurses, and other health professionals with an understanding on mental health support available directly to them, as well as trauma-related information they can access to support their patients in times of disaster. So Sessions 2 webinar will also inform health professionals on how our PHN's bushfire recovery coordinators can offer support. Speakers will include Kath Walker from Craner Plus, Anita Savick from Phoenix, Australia, Cheyenne Moody and Scott Wood from the PHN, and we'll also have a GP chair. And just before you head off tonight, could you please fill out the evaluation survey in the polls tab? We really appreciate your feedback. So thanks everyone again for joining us. Thanks to our presenters, and we hope you have a great night.